And Professor Law, what's Salk's Harnessing Plants initiative?
So the Harnessing Plant Initiative at Salk is based on harnessing the natural ability of plants to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And what we'd like to do is generate plants that can draw down a significant portion of the excess CO2 that's put into the atmosphere based on human activity. And so while this is clearly an audacious project, the basic idea behind the core idea is very easy to understand. So we want to use the fact that plants during the process of photosynthesis take CO2 from the atmosphere and generate plant biomass. And then the idea would be to generate plants that take that CO2 and generate deeper, more robust root systems that contain molecules that are resistant to degradation. So in a year-over-year basis, we would be essentially locking more carbon from the atmosphere into the soil.
All right, and Professor Knoll, how did the idea to use a cork-like substance to help plants grow more complex root systems and absorb more carbon dioxide, how did that come about?
It actually goes back to my childhood. So I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and my grandmother and great-grandmother were avid gardeners, taught me to love plants from a very early age. And I actually got very into composting, actually degrading kitchen waste, and I collected leaves in the neighborhood, etc. And one thing I remembered a couple years ago when we began thinking about plants as a way to change the conversation about carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was that I was trying to decompose corks from wine bottles in a compost bin. And I remembered that they actually persisted for long periods of time. And so I sort of drew back on that a couple of years ago when we started talking about how plants might be a mitigating factor for CO2 in the atmosphere.
Oh, interesting backstory on that. And Professor Knoll, how many plants or what will it take to achieve the project goal of reducing CO2 by 20 to 46%? It's a pretty ambitious goal.
It's a very ambitious goal, and we're focusing really at this moment on crops. So the major food crops that are used worldwide. That allows us to gain the acreage that we need to actually combat the issue of CO2 in the atmosphere. And right now we're looking at about 8 plants that are grown on about half of the global acreage used to farm plants.
And which type of plants are we talking about? How did you identify which ones to grow?
So we actually looked at what are actually grown as the major food crops worldwide in terms of their sheer acreage. So things like corn, rice, wheat, and then even things like cover crops that are used to actually enrich the soil, radishes, clover, and ryegrass.
So why does this work? How does this work? Tell us about the process.
So it's an interesting idea that, for a number of years, people have been thinking about engineering approaches to reducing the carbon dioxide that's already in our atmosphere. But the answer was actually staring us right in the face. It's all around us. It was plants. So this really interesting process called photosynthesis that is the basis of their entire food chain, which is what plants do. They actually use carbon dioxide as a fertilizer, and they convert it into a whole host of really wonderful natural chemicals, one of which is cork. We call it suberin, but most people are familiar with it as cork. But all plants actually have it, and it will actually stay behind in the soil because all roots of plants in particular make a lot of this corky material, and it's a protective mechanism that plants have that regulates their interaction with the environment. But we also know when you actually go in and look at soils that are very organically rich, very fertile, and you actually say, what are the natural molecules that are in soil? It turns out that it's the building blocks of cork. So it's a way of converting this carbon dioxide, which a lot of people nowadays think of as a toxic pollutant. We reframed the question. We look at it as a fertilizer. We're all carbon-based life forms, so every carbon atom in your body actually comes from carbon dioxide. So by reframing that problem and realizing that plants are all around us, and rather than using an engineering solution, we use a natural solution that biology has been perfecting over the last 2.8 billion years since photosynthesis first arose on Earth.
All right, so I'll throw this out as kind of a jump ball question for both of you. How do you determine the impact? How do you scale this up on a worldwide basis and hope it has enough impact to be meaningful to thwart climate change?
So, I mean, on a broad level, of course, we want to try to get these plants, the prototypes out and running, and then we have to partner with NGOs and seed companies and talk to farmers to get these out and planted at scale and take advantage of that already set in place infrastructure. And in terms of measurement, there'll be a lot of part of the project is to be able to measure and quantify it in much level detail than we're able to do now, exactly how much carbon is staying behind in the soils. But the nice part about the initiative is that it's very scalable. So the one individual plant only needs to be a little bit better at doing taking the CO2 and storing it in these cork-like molecules in the soil, and if you add it up over all the different plants that we're trying to generate and all the different acreage that we'd like to cover, we can make a big impact.
I've been speaking with Salk Institute professors Joe Knoll and Julie Law, both members of the Salk Plant Biology team. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.